if you, again, if you want to have a better life, and that means if you want to have less depression, less anxiety, the way to do that is by developing your own personal spiritual practice.
Welcome to Spiritually Hungry. On today's podcast, I'm excited. We're talking about many things, but there's one thing I found specifically interesting and helpful, and that is that there's something that each of us can do every single day to prevent depression.
That's good.
The World Health Organization's data shows that 264 million people around the world suffer from depression. Just think about that number for a second. That's crazy. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for youth and late adolescents. And a study of 67,000 college students in 2019 found that 9% had attempted suicide. I would bet the number's probably higher now. And many people struggle with less debilitating conditions like burnout, chronic stress, and loneliness. Loneliness, really, I think it's something that's not spoken about often enough. So I kind of want to unpack that and go in that direction a little bit later. And medical treatments, such as antidepressants, only help half of patients after they are in treatment for over a year. And 20% will experience only a reduction in their symptoms. So there is a book called The Awakened Brain by Dr. Lisa Miller. And
she's also the author of the book we mentioned last episode, The Spiritual Child.
Right. And I think her research is fascinating. She uses brain imaging techniques such as MRIs in an effort to find ways of preventing depression. And in her research, she came on to something really fascinating. So what was nearly the invisible variable, the silver bullet she was looking for in her data, was actually spirituality. And she found that people who were spiritual, lived a spiritual life, had a belief in God and a relationship with God.
By the way, not necessarily God, right? A higher power.
Well, I'm saying God because that's how I refer to it. But yes, had some kind of spiritual practice in their daily lives. They were able to ward off so many different diseases and live a full life, really. So I know there's a lot you want to say on it, but for our listeners, I wanted to share what her images of the brain showed her and how she discovered that so they can have a visual as we talk about this. So in her book, she writes, on the top half of the page was a black rectangle with two brain images inside. The scan on the left showed the composite brain image of participants with low spirituality, those who had reported the religion or spirituality was a medium, mild, or low importance to them. The scan on the right showed the composite brain of participants with sustained high spirituality, those who had said religion or spirituality was of high personal importance. The brain on the left, the low spiritual brain, was flecked intermittently with tiny red patches, but the brain on the right, the brain showing the neural structure of people with stable and high spirituality, had huge swaths of red, at least 5 times the size of small flecks in the other scan. I think that's just blows my mind.
And what do those represent?
So the high spiritual brain was healthier and more robust than the low spiritual brain.
The red swaths represented
yes, the more red was
robust health.
Exactly. And the high spiritual brain, the more red, was thicker and stronger in exactly the same regions that weaken and wither in depressed brains.
Interesting.
Fascinating. So I think it's a great read. I want to give an example of a study, but what did you,
I thought
you have an opinion about this too.
Oh, many opinions. First of all, I think the power of her research.
Well, she was reluctant. They were nervous when they had to present this to their group. They're sitting across a long table and they're bringing the research that they found. And they all thought that spirituality wouldn't influence anything at all. They were shocked by the findings at first.
Right. So I think, again, I often have these conversations with people. Most of the people we're talking to are people who are awakened spiritually, but I think even for them, it's certainly not as awakened. I think, whereas maybe 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, to be spiritual was sort of outside of what people would think of the norm of logic sometimes, or certainly science.
Or necessity.
Well,
for daily living. It's something like an add-on, maybe if you're interested. It was kind of like a hobby, really.
I think the science is in, and it's telling us a few things, but one of them is that if you want to have a better life, and that means if you want to have less depression, less anxiety, the way to do that is by developing your own personal spiritual practice. And again, the MRI, the brain imaging shows that, the studies show that. And at this point, it would be silly for any person not to do what they can to develop a strong, internal life, as it's referred to. But one thing I want to point out, and I think this is also very important, both understanding and directive. The question that she used for that initial study that came to the understanding of the different, literally, brain makeup of people who are spiritual and those who are not is the following question: how personally important is religion or spirituality to you? So how
right,
important
when she did the study, that was the question she asked the participants.
Exactly. And it's a very important question, even for those of us who are spiritual, because what this study tells us is not simply that if you're spiritual, then you are less likely to be depressed, you're less likely to have anxiety, and so on. The deeper your spirituality, the more connected you are, which brings me to a very important teaching. I was actually having a conversation.
The deeper your spirituality, the more connected you are to...
The more protected you are.
Protected, okay.
The more protected you are, the healthier you will be, mentally at least.
Well, that's the crazy part of it all, right? I mean, we talk about this, especially now. There's so many different hacks for longevity and, do this, do that. And of course, and I'm the first to sign up for all of those things, cold plunges and saunas and exercise, and it's all important. And we talk about this a lot just privately. The most important of all those things is really your spiritual connection and relationship to something higher.
Right.
That is the overall, like you said, protection. Yeah.
And I'll share with our listeners a story which might be controversial. I hope it won't be. But last week I was with some of our friends, and we were having a conversation about, as many of us know, or might not know, I don't know, but it's very much in vogue today. There are many people who use all kinds of, I guess we'll call them drugs or otherwise, for spiritual experience. Ayahuasca being one, and there's many other usages of it. And that maybe we should actually have a whole podcast on that.
We need some guests for that one.
Yes. I have not, and neither has Monica, ever tried ayahuasca. And again, I want to be very careful on how I say this. I certainly know people who, through their experience of these, they call them plant medicine, whatever other forms that they take, have had a spiritual awakening and have had spiritual benefit. The argument that, it wasn't an argument, my view, which is, I think, important as it relates to our conversation, but certainly as it relates to taking what I would say is a shortcut to spirituality, is the fact that you have to be very mindful that your spiritual practice is one that is challenging.
Well, it's interesting because when people go on these journeys, right, they're feeling a closeness and affinity with the creator, or however you want to reference it. But I guess, are you saying that, is that really a muscle that's built?
Well,
because
that's the question.
Are you connecting when it's hard or just when you're in an altered state?
Well, let me say something I think is absolutely true. That there are people who go down that path and for whom it is greatly spiritually beneficial. And there are those who go down that path who use these plant medicines, and they aren't necessarily doing the spiritual work from that. For some people, it is an awakening to do greater, deeper spiritual work, and for others, it's not.
So if you had that experience and now you're awakened, and then it builds a desire to work at that in natural ways every day, super powerful. Also for people who don't have the desire, let's say they're in deep depression, having this kind of reset using this kind of medicine, absolutely. I'm all for that.
Absolutely. So again, I don't want to get diverted too much to talk about those experiences. My point simply was that what I shared was, I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. All I can say is that I know is that a spiritual path needs to be one that challenges us, which means that the internal work of transformation, of growth, of introspection cannot be, or at least to maximize the benefits of them, cannot be one that is without its challenge and push. There's a beautiful Aramaic phrase that I quoted in that conversation, which I think is important for all of us to keep in mind all the time. It says lefum tzara agra, which means depending on the challenge or the difficulty is the reward and the benefit. So for our listeners who might have heard that question,
but you need desire.
You need desire, but I think the beautiful thing about this research is that it is now clear that this is not just an additional choice in life. I'll be a runner and I'll be a person who eats healthy and I'll be spiritual.
No, it's like
it has to be a very high priority. Right. And with that, a question. So I would rephrase for our listeners the question, not simply how personally important is religion or spirituality to you, because I think many more people will answer yes to that question, will answer yes to the following question. How much do you challenge yourself daily for the purpose of your spiritual practice, whatever it is?
Well, can you unpack or define challenge yourself? So what would that look like?
Yes.
Because that's, relative to each person.
Right. So, and again, I'm going to use general examples, some of them. So I'm sure there's people who meditate every morning for 20 minutes, half hour.
By the way, and the studies, that is absolutely one way.
Absolutely.
For some to connect, and it does reduce inflammation in the body because you stop being stressed, and that is absolutely a tool. But I guess the question then is, when you're meditating, what are you connecting to?
Well, more than that, I would say I wouldn't, again, clearly meditation is very powerful. Endless studies about that as well.
These are tools.
But the next question I would ask is, in what ways are you challenging yourself? For example, let's say you meditate in the morning and then you do nothing else throughout the day. Is there a benefit? Of course. And your spirituality important to you? It might be. But if you're not being challenged, then you will not receive the greatest of the benefits that a spiritual pathway has for you.
I feel like you're saying two things. That if you're not being challenged, you're not challenging yourself.
Challenging yourself. No, I'm not talking about being challenged.
Okay, you just said okay. So challenge yourself. What would that look like? So you meditate in the morning, and then
right. So by the way, it might be the day that you don't feel like meditating, you push yourself to do it, right? Because I think most people will, well, okay, I don't feel like doing it today, I'll do it tomorrow. Or are you pushing yourself to share, for example? Are you pushing yourself to overcome your anger, for example? Are you pushing yourself to overcome your desire to gossip, for example, right?
To see the light in a situation that seems just dark and...
Exactly. So the point being is it's not enough.
I think what you're saying is, do you bring the creator or whatever the force is into every part of your daily existence, good and bad?
Right. And again, I would add, I think the word challenging yourself is an important element here, because I do think that there are many people who take spirituality as an important part of their lives, but when it suits them or when it's comfortable or when it fits in and so on and so forth. And what the ancient spiritual leaders and teachers for thousands of years have said is that that's nice. Again, it's better than having zero, but the benefits that the greater the challenge that one puts themselves in for spiritual growth and investment of their time in it, the more benefits they will see from it.
Right. Well, you have to take risks to do that, right? You have to be willing to put yourself in.
I mean, what Lisa Miller, what her research showed, the MRI imaging, that the brain is going to be different. It's going to be a healthier brain, and everything flows from the brain. So it makes sense, of course, that if a spiritual life leads you to a stronger brain, it obviously will lead to endless amount of positive effects throughout the body.
Well, she actually said that a high spiritual brain, she calls the high spiritual brain the awakened brain. So she says these three things, and I thought it packs it really nicely. The awakened decision is a better decision. With the awakened perception, we're more creative, collaborative, ethical, and innovative. She said the awakened brain is the healthier brain. An engaged spiritual life enhances grit, optimism, and resilience while providing insulation against addiction, trauma, and depression. The awakened life is an inspired life. Loss, uncertainty, and even trauma are the gateways by which we're invited to move beyond merely coping with hardship to transcend into a life of renewal, healing, joy, and fulfillment, which is what you just said. The awakened brain takes in the world fully and provides a pervasive sense of well-being.
Beautiful. And again, what I love about this is that this is not a spiritual person saying
it's
this.
Science.
It's science and research. So again, what I wanted to say before is I want to be very careful again how I share this, but I thought very much in line with what you just said. So I was watching this documentary about Sergio de Mello, who was I found it inspiring.
Give people a little background in case they don't know who he is.
He was the he did many amazing things throughout his life. He worked in the United Nations, and his last position he was the head of the UN work in Iraq after the war with Iraq.
So what year is this?
Yeah, this occurred in 2003, August 2003. An Al Qaeda terrorist apparently drove a truck bomb literally into the UN compound right by his office, probably trying to kill him. Explodes the bomb, explodes the truck. The building comes down. Many people died that day. In this one cavity of the destroyed building, there were two people who survived the initial blast. There were a few others who died there. One man, his name was Gil, and another man, and Sergio de Mello. And again, the way it's again, I do recommend watching the documentary if you're interested in it. But they were basically lying one on top of the other in this little cavity in the destroyed building. 2 U.S. soldiers they had no heavy equipment to remove the debris, to remove the building. They were basically stuck there.
Like so in a coffin type situation.
Yeah. Okay. It's a crazy story. So these two soldiers are trying with whatever they can, taking up piece after piece after piece. This goes on for a long time. And one of the soldiers was clearly a religious man. And he starts talking to both this man, Gil, and Sergio, about
the two men that are in. The one soldier that's trapped. Out is the religious man.
Right. And saying, let's pray. And so one of them is sort of amenable to it, but who knows what his view was. And Sergio was like, F prayer now. And like, don't give me anything, like F God. Like he was like really, and it's interesting. And again, I want to be very mindful. Clearly, Sergio Mello did amazing.
Because you don't want to pack his whole life in that moment.
Of course not. And who knows, like,
nobody knows how they'd respond in that situation.
And also this doesn't, the amazing thing is Gil survived and Sergio didn't. Mm-hmm. And again, there is a lot of research on this as well. That again, I heard some people saying, even if you don't believe it, you should live as if you believe it because it has so many benefits. I would go the extra step as we actually believe it. But I think you hear so much, whether it's research, you hear a story like this, and it's like, it gives you pause. Like there's a power to this that is beyond what again, I was going to say, it's not beyond the physical, but it's beyond what we would have thought happens on the physical level. And when you start reading about this research and you start hearing about, again, the MRIs and the brain imaging, and you start realizing there's a power to a spiritual path. And what I would say, again, to our listeners, just back to...
By the way, did Gil have any opinion about why he survived and surgery?
They didn't interview. I'd
be curious about that.
Again, to be clear, he was above Sergio, so he was more likely to have survived probably anyway. It's a gruesome story of how they took him out. It's all in the documentary.
Yeah, that's the part I walked in on.
Yeah, but bottom line is it's not so much about what happened that day. It is another story that seems to indicate that a spiritual connection gives you, again, and the science tells us this, gives you greater abilities. I do want to go back just to, I know, the fact that, because we were talking about people who see themselves as spiritual, I would just say, certainly for our listeners, don't take that as being enough, right? Push yourself. You have to be pushing yourself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I do want to share, because I think that this is part of it. I think people can, for instance, be spiritual, right? And practice, have even a spiritual life or a routine, but feel lonely, for example, right? So how could that be? So even if you're...
by the way, it's funny you say that, because I think we know, unfortunately, a lot of people who, if you ask them, are you spiritual? Say, absolutely, yes. But point. They are the depressed
Exactly my point.
Yeah.
And this actually just hits kind of close to home, because I think I don't know, for whatever reason, the last year, that theme of loneliness, I hear it a lot in people who have people around them, who have grandchildren or siblings, or, go on dates even in their 70s. Like there's so much opportunity, but they're so lonely. Why is that? And if you ask them, are they, yeah, I believe in God. Yes, I go and I pray every Saturday or Sunday, depending on your religion, but there's still that feeling. Why is that? So, and I thought about this because actually I want to quote Dr. Vivek H. Murthy, is a Surgeon General of the United States. And he wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times. It's called, "We Have Become a Lonely Nation. Let's fix that." And states are at their loneliness now because of the past couple of years. But he goes on to say that his first stint as a Surgeon General ended in 2017. He felt profound loneliness. He was no longer going to his office and interacting with colleagues. And while he was Surgeon General, he had let his friendships lapse. And I think about that a lot because when you go through different stages of life, right? We have this conversation a lot. Do I want to spend more time with friends? Yes. Do I want to spend more time making friends? Yes. But then when you look at your day and you look at what you're trying to achieve in the world, and you look about your relationship with yourself, your relationship with your husband, your relationship with your children, I mean, it's hard to keep all these relationships going. So I could relate to what he was saying, but he said in retrospect, he acknowledged that he made a critical mistake focusing on his work over maintaining his friendships. And I was thinking about this because early on, right, as children, we were riding bikes with our friends, having sleepovers, spending so much time together, finding new things to do. And then as we get older, it's less and less of a priority. But if you look back at those days, those were really, really meaningful and purposeful. We felt like we belonged to something, we were part of something. And I know that when I'm most tapped into those kinds of friendships, I feel really connected to the Creator. I feel really part of that being and that essence. And he went on to share that even when he was with people, he wasn't really present. Instead, he was checking his inbox and news sites. His feelings of isolation chipped away at his self-esteem and eroded in his sense of who he was. So I think it's very much correlated to your relationship with a higher being.
Yeah. I think it's actually something that Lisa Miller, I think, speaks about when she says, let me find it.
I do want to say one more thing. If you look at, for example, I love looking at Blue Zone, places of longevity, and in Japan, that's one area that showed an increased well-being and lifespans. One of the factors for these areas was lifetime friendships and a sense of community, which is another big important idea. That's on par with ceasing smoking and nearly twice as beneficial as physical activity in terms of decreasing your odds of dying early. So fascinating.
For sure. So what I was going to say is, so Lisa Miller says that when she calls the awakened brain, which basically means a person who has a deep sense of spirituality and a desire, as we said before, to invest the time and effort in it, we begin to live beyond a pieces and parts model of identity and a splintered, fragmented view of who we are to one another, and to cultivate a way of being built on a core awareness of love, interconnection, and the guidance and surprise of life. And I think that's an important point. And again, and maybe we should, at some point on a different podcast, go more deeply into the spiritual aspects of friendship. But I think
I had the same thought actually when I was thinking about today's podcast.
One of the awakenings or levels of clarity, I would say, that one should have when we are spiritual, if to the degree we are, is our openness to everybody else around us. I think, again, I know very many successful, good people, some of them are my friends, who don't go through life with that sense of needing others outside of themselves. And I think one of the benefits, as she points out, of a spiritual foundation to life is the fact that you do see yourself as both needing and being interconnected with everybody else.
I think part of the problem that I identified as I was thinking about this topic is that we walk around wearing many masks because we want people to see us as just like them. So we don't show up authentically. We don't show up vulnerably. We're afraid to say how we really feel, or if we're struggling. We don't connect in the ways that we're meant to, that forge deep friendships and community. So even if you desire to have a spiritual community or be part of that or have deep relationships, more friendships, if you're not showing up as your authentic self because you're afraid to really be seen as who you are, then you're never going to have that experience. There's something, I really love this poem. Actually, it's from Shel Silverstein, Everything on It. It says, she had blue skin and so did he. He kept it hid and so did she. They searched for blue their whole life through, then passed right by and never knew. And that's kind of what we do, right? When we don't show up as who we are, we hide behind our masks. We hide our true aspects. We're afraid to really be honest about what we crave and need from other people. And then it just creates that space and that separation. And then we truly do feel lonely.
Absolutely. And I do think it's important to point out one thing that the research shows, which, I don't know if all of our listeners will be happy or not happy about this, binary breakaway between spirituality and religion. So that everything that the research shows that one receives benefits from a deep spiritual internal life does not show up for people who grew up in a religious,
very
religious,
point.
necessarily dogmatic religious beliefs that weren't made personal, which is kind of an amazing thing that all the science that tells us, all the research that tells us,
you can't believe in God because that's the right thing to do,
or because that's
your soul will be saved, or whatever.
Yeah, but by the way, and again, I don't want to disparage any of those beliefs. All I'm saying is that the research shows that all the great benefits of which we're speaking are specifically for those who have a personal spiritual path, an internal life, or as Lisa Miller refers to it as the awakened brain. A person who grew up or still even maintains a relatively dogmatic religious life that does not integrate a deep spiritual practice and beliefs does not receive those benefits. For me, that's an indication clearly, which is something that we believed even before this research, that spirituality is the core of truth, and that all the other, call it religious practices, were only meant as a layer upon that spiritual foundational truth. And it was never meant to be the ultimate purpose or core.
And I guess the question for people is, how do we awaken our brains, right? It's just like going to the gym. You have to practice it day in and day out. Like you said at the beginning, challenge yourself each day. Check your thoughts. Thoughts can be changed. See how flexible you are to new experiences, seeing things in a new and different way. And as it comes to loneliness, I said this when we were on our retreat in Mexico, that you will never feel lonely ever if you have a strong connection to the Creator. You just simply cannot, because you're never alone. You're not afraid of being by yourself. You're not afraid of being without other physical people. Of course, all of that's important, but you have that deep sense of belonging. I thought this was really interesting because, I love facts and percentages. Loneliness is more than just a bad feeling. When people are socially disconnected, the risk of anxiety and depression increases, and so does the risk of, listen to these numbers, heart disease, 29%, dementia, 50%, and stroke, 32%. The increased risk of premature death associated with social disconnection is comparable to smoking daily, and maybe even greater than the risk associated with obesity. Is that wild? That blows my mind.
Very cool.
Is it cool?
I'd like to add two things, again, both research-based. One of them is from Dr. David Schaefer, who's the chair of Columbia University's Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. And it's related to what we spoke about last episode, but certainly what we're speaking about this one. And he said the following: I never would have considered that religion or spirituality might be significant to psychiatry until I was studying child and adolescent suicide and discovered a surprising glimmer in the data. Our rather large school-based screening psychopathology found that it's very difficult to identify protective factors against suicide. There was no single variable that tells us who will or won't show suicidality.
Wow, that's terrifying.
Except for one.
Spirituality.
Strong personal spirituality, the only variable inversely associated with suicide.
Wow, that's wild.
And again, all these are just more breadcrumbs, right? But and
that's so powerful.
Right. But again, back to what this means. Because the question can be asked, I know, and maybe even our own lives, we experience, well, we're spiritual. It is certainly important to us. It is certainly something that we push ourselves to practice in whatever way we can. But sometimes we do feel anxiety. Sometimes we do feel sadness. Sometimes we do feel, we don't feel the protection that the studies would suggest we should have. And the answer is very simple. So there's a story that I always like to tell about a great Kabbalist, and there's a foundational book of this wisdom called the Zohar. and it's said to have be very powerful, and it's even just scanning it, even just having it in your house brings protection, and certainly reading it can help with any problem that you have. So a student once came to his teacher and he said, I'm having terrible fears. What should I do? He said, you should go and read Zohar. And he goes and he reads the Zohar and he comes back to his teacher. He said, I read Zohar for the past few hours and I still have these fears. What should I do? So his teacher said, read more Zohar. And the point is
right,
that
well, he was quick, like, oh, it's the work.
It's the work, and sometimes it's more work, and sometimes it's more work. There's another ancient teaching that says, if you have not worked hard and you have achieved spiritual connection level, don't believe it, which means it will not last. And I think
Is that back to what you were saying?
Yeah, exactly. And the idea is, to our listeners, if you didn't believe before, and I'm sure most of our listeners probably did, that spirituality has great benefits. Science is now telling us, research is now telling us, brain imaging is telling us that this is a path for health on many levels, mental health and so on. But it is not simply the fact that you meditate 10 minutes a day is going to give you all these protections. This, what we're talking about here, and what the science would suggest, is deep spiritual practice, more and more and more. And especially for those of us who are going through a challenge, who are going through anxiety, who are going through fears.
Which is why we tend to isolate ourselves even more.
Exactly. Science's clear recommendation is more. Push yourself, challenge yourself, especially if, because I think what happens sometimes is, a person studies spirituality or is spiritual, but he's still experiencing anxiety or sadness. Oh, it's not working. well, too bad. Now you can't use that excuse anymore because science tells us it does work.
I know, by the way.
So what is it? More.
That's funny. It's interesting. As I was talking about masks earlier, I think that people, again, hide themselves because they're afraid if they show up as their authentic selves, they'll be rejected and then they'll feel lonely. But by not being yourself and not showing who you are, what happens? You are lonely and you feel isolated. And again, Silverstein's poem, if you wear a mask to hide yourself, how will your friends find you? If they're wearing a mask, how will you recognize them?
Beautiful. So I'd like to share.
Letter for us?
Yeah, I'd like to share a quick letter from one of our listeners.
How do you choose them, though? How do you decipher between who gets?
I'm sorry. I apologize to all the thousands of people who have already emailed us, and I have not read their emails, but I do want to say we do read every single email. So I want to deeply encourage.
Are you doing that already?
No, not yet. Again, I'll do it twice, once before the letter, one after. To send all your questions, comments, and stories, inspirations to Monica and Michael at spirituallyhungry.life. I'll read this short letter from Miriam. Hi, Monica and Michael.
Oh, our daughter wrote in?
No. I don't think so, but who knows? Maybe. This episode is a warm hug. I feel...
She likes warm hugs.
Heard. That's true. Our daughter Miriam does like... I feel heard as a, parentheses, grown-up child. Thanks so much. I am still single and child-free, but getting focused inwardly and building up on myself spiritually has been a blessing. Someday when I have my own family, I will be more loving and a better person for them. More power to both of you and the Spiritually Hungry podcast. Okay. Thank you, Miriam, for sharing that with us, and a warm hug back to you. Reminder to all of our listeners, send your questions, comments, stories, inspirations to Monica and Michael at spirituallyhungry.life. To share this podcast with everybody you know, to go to Apple Podcasts and write 5-star reviews. And again, on Spotify, wherever you do listen to this podcast, make sure to share it with your entire family and friends. As we just learned in this podcast, it'll make your life and their life that much better. We hope you enjoyed listening to this podcast as much as we enjoyed recording.
Stay spiritually hungry.